Welcome, everybody. My name is Andrew Patricia, and I've been a business owner over the last 30 years. But over the last 21 or so years, I've been educating and training business owners. And I found that some of the most successful business owners I've worked with have really been good at creating presentations, great presentations. And because of this, this has really helped them grow their business. And one of my favorite stories is a business owner that I've been working with over the years. And when I first met her, I said to her, one of the great opportunities, I think, for business owners is when you can get in front of a group, you can present your expertise, you can present your skills, and this is one of the best marketing tools I know. And the nice thing about that is that she used this advice, she used this method of marketing her services, and has gone on to build a very successful business. So I want you to understand that if you're good at presenting, it's really going to help you as a business owner. It's going to help you when you present your ideas. It's going to help you when you try and sell your products or services. It's going to help you if you pitch your idea. Let's say, for example, one of the opportunities for you is to raise money. The one lesson I've learned over the years is often the best presenter gets the money. And I think this is something that's really key that you understand, that if you become a great presenter, it'll give you the opportunity to expand your business. It'll give you the opportunity to present your ideas to customers. It'll give you the opportunity, if you need to raise money. So there are so many benefits out of being a great presenter. So I encourage you to learn this. And for me, I think it's a great way of sharing your expertise. I really believe this. It's a great way to share your expertise. The other thing that I like is it's a great way to educate potential customers. This is the way I think. I think that nowadays we need to educate potential customers. If we educate them about our product or service, there's a really good chance they will buy it from us. So understand that this is your opportunity to share your knowledge, to share your experience, and really educate the customer or potential customer so she can buy your product or service. And where can we use presentations really well? I mean, just think of the simple things like a trade show. And I'm sure a lot of you have attended trade shows over the years as you've been growing your business. And I'm sure a lot of you have attended seminars at trade shows too. So this could be an opportunity for you. Maybe you could be that person that presents at these trade shows. Another great opportunity are conferences. I think this is a big opportunity where you as a business owner go out there and present your ideas, present your knowledge, present your expertise, and this is going to generate a lot of revenue for you. But let me tell you an interesting story. One of the first places that I worked in internationally was in Russia. And that really started because I was speaking at a conference. Somebody approached me after the conference and said to me, would you like to come and work in Russia? And that's where it started. And I want you to understand that this could be an opportunity for you. This could be an opportunity for you to share your expertise, share your knowledge. And I've found that many times over the years, many times over the years, after I've presented at a conference or a trade show, somebody's approached me about working with them. So I want you to understand the improving your presentation skills opens up opportunities. It opens up opportunities to share your knowledge, to share your experience, to share what you know with other people. And because you're sharing your knowledge and your experience, they're probably going to buy from you. There's opportunity at meetups. There's opportunity at industry associations. All of these are great opportunities for you and I to share our knowledge, to share our experience, to create presentations that we can present to groups. Now, if you ever get the opportunity to do a presentation, I think there are a couple of things that you and I can do really well. And it all involves being well prepared and really understanding the importance of doing your research before you do a presentation. Because one of the key things you want to do is, if you ever get the opportunity to present, you want to make it interesting and you want to make it relevant, which is really key. It's got to be interesting and it's got to be relevant. So to make it interesting and relevant, I think there are a couple of things you can do in advance. Firstly is really understand who's going to be in your audience. And the more you understand about this, the better it is for you, because then you can tailor make your presentation to suit them. And I've found this works really well when I'm doing presentations, because once I understand the audience, once I understand what their needs are, once I understand why they're attending, this makes it more interesting and more relevant to me, because then I'm going to come up with case studies that are relevant to them. Then I'm going to come up with stories that are relevant to them. Then I'm going to come up with content that is relevant to them. So this is what you want to know. Who are your audience? Who are the people that are going to be sitting listening to this presentation? Whether it's a sales presentation, whether you're pitching an idea, whether you're educating, who are they? Why are they attending? And I'm sure every single one of you have attended a webinar or attended a seminar or attended a presentation, and you really don't feel like being there. And because you don't feel like being there, sometimes it even shows in your body language. But as soon as the presenter presents something really interesting to you, well, it changes the whole thing. But it's got to be relevant to you. So when you're doing a presentation, try and think about who's going to be there, why they're attending, and more importantly, what do they want to learn. People attend presentations, people attend seminars, people attend webinars, people attend events because they really want to learn. And one of the important things we've got to learn as business owners or as presenters is, when we are presenting, it's about the audience. That's really the key thing. We want to make it relevant to them. Because if we share our expertise and knowledge or educate them and they benefit from it, there's a very good chance they will then buy from us. And one of the lessons I've learned over the years in doing presentations and creating webinars is that if you want to get people's attention, focus on a topic that is relevant to them. Focus on something that grabs their attention. So here are a couple of examples on the screen that I am sure that most of you online would be interested in. You know, the 6 best advertising strategies for small business. This would pique your interest, and you would want to attend a seminar or a presentation based on that. And I think this is the way we've got to think when we're creating presentations, is the heading will often influence whether the person's going to attend. So think about this. The second one I've got here is, especially if you're going to trade shows, 3 ways to break through the noise at a trade show. Again, if I was going to a presentation or an educational event about trade shows, this would be really interesting for me. So here's the lesson. Think about your audience. Think about what they would like to learn, and think about what would attract them. And those are the best headlines. So always think about your audience. Once you've created your heading, once you've created your topic, the next thing is really fleshing out your presentation. And one of the things I like doing is, usually on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard, is I will start going through all the different headings I want to discuss. So I would think about, this is my presentation, say it's about marketing. Then I start breaking down exactly what I want to discuss. If I was pitching to a group of investors, I'd do exactly the same thing. I would think about what are the most important topics for them, and then I'd go through each one and explain it in very simple language. So really it's about flushing out your presentation. Come up with the headings, or this is typically what I do. The next thing you want to do is to focus on the points. And I encourage you to do this every single time you're doing a presentation. Is you don't have to use slides, you don't have to use PowerPoints, you don't have to use any fancy presentation equipment. But you've got to make sure that you write down very, very clearly exactly what you're going to speak about. Because if somebody's organized their presentation, you can see or you can hear that they've organized their presentation. If somebody is not organized, you're going to realize very, very quickly that this is chaos. So this is what I encourage you to do. Come up with headings. Just think of it as slides. Come up with headings for your slides and then flush out the points that you're going to be discussing. So come up with your heading for your presentation, come up with headings for your slides, and then flush out the bullet points as you go through it. And there are a couple of things that you need to think about as you go through the presentation, is that every single thing that you discuss, every single thing that you present needs to be relevant to the audience. And they really need to understand it. I don't know if you've ever sat in on a presentation and you think to yourself, and what was the point of that? You don't want to be that person. So always focus on what's in it for the listeners. You've got to give them value. You've got to give them information that they can use. And it really doesn't matter who you're presenting to. Let's use an example. Let's say we were educating clients. Let's say that was the objective. We were trying to educate a client or a potential client to purchase our product or service. We would give them enough information so they would be more educated, and also enough information so they could make the purchasing decision. And hopefully they'll make it from us. So focus on the benefits to the listeners. And also don't include too much information. I don't know if you've ever been to a presentation where somebody puts up these slides and there's like tons of information on a slide. And usually they apologize for that. Just be very, very careful. Just be to the point, short, engaging. That's really what you want to be doing, is your presentations need to be interesting. They need to be short. They need to be to the point. They need to be easy to understand. And I think if you do that, it's really going to help. The one lesson I've learned about doing presentations, and whenever I speak to my business owners, and whenever I speak to people that are doing presentations, I say to them that the most important presentations, or the most relevant presentations, or the presentations you enjoy the most, is when somebody really explains to you in a way that you understand. And usually that means telling stories. I say to business owners, if you've got the opportunity, tell people stories. Everybody loves stories. Everybody loves stories. So learn to tell stories. And on the right-hand side of the screen here, I've got a TED video. And I don't know if any of you watch TED videos on a regular basis, but I encourage you to do that. There's a great video there, and it tells about what stories really resonate with people. And they use a couple of examples, a couple of really interesting examples of people telling stories that you can relate to. And even in my business training, I find that when I tell a story, I often get the attention of people really, really quickly. So I encourage you to learn from this, is tell people stories. Tell people stories that they can relate to. Tell people stories that are interesting. Tell people stories that they can remember. Because you and I remember stories. So instead of going too much into content, start off by telling a story. I think that is a great way to do a presentation, is by telling stories. And I find when I do presentations to groups, those are the things that they really love. Another lesson that I think I've learned over the years from other presenters that really works is starting your presentation off really well really helps. So there are a couple of things you can do. One of the things you can do is maybe start off with a powerful question. In front of a group, ask them a question and then just pause. That works brilliantly when you're doing a presentation, because when you ask people a question, it gets their attention. And when you pause, it gets their attention even more. So that's one of the ways you can do it. Another one is state an interesting fact. Something that is maybe unusual, that is different, that people would have to research for. Because I find that when you state facts, when you state statistics, when you state percentages, you often get people's attention. The third one, and that is my favorite one, is tell a compelling story. One of my favorite stories was I was doing a presentation to a group of accountants, maybe 500 accountants. Actually, I was thinking about it the other day, because when I present to groups, what has been the largest group that I've presented to, and I can't remember, but this was maybe one of them. I was speaking at a conference, and one of the guys that I knew really well had traveled with me to different parts of the world. We'd been to Korea together, we'd been to Belfast together, always presenting at international small business conferences. And what I decided to do was to start off my presentation by telling a story. And the story was about how Fred and I met. It was really interesting. I was at a conference in Toronto in 1999, and I met this guy at the pub. I was at the pub getting drinks for everybody. I met this guy, and I never forgot this guy because he told a really interesting story. He told me a story about visiting Africa. And he said to me that he'd visited South Africa, and actually he'd visited a northern part of Africa. And I thought this was so fascinating that this guy traveled, he'd been to a country, and he wasn't even sure where he had been. And I told this story over and over again for about a year. And then when I got to Korea, I met this guy. I didn't know it was the same guy that I had met the previous year. And we were on a bus together, and we were traveling from the Samsung factory, and a great experience visiting a Samsung factory in Korea. And I was traveling, and I was in the bus with this guy, and he was talking to me. And the more questions I asked him, the more eventually I realized I knew who this guy was. I had randomly met this guy a year before at a conference. And it was just such a massive coincidence. In 1999, I met him in Toronto, and in 2000, I met him in Seoul in Korea. And I thought, what a coincidence to meet the same person in two different countries at a conference. Anyway, so I told this story, and it was one of my favorite conferences because everybody could relate to it. And really, that is the key thing. You want to tell stories that people can relate to. And Fred and I went on to become really good friends, and eventually he referred a whole lot of work to me in the Caribbean, and that's where my presentation started. But it was meeting somebody at a conference who I met again that I built a relationship with, and it shows you in business, we meet people on a regular basis, and they can really help us grow our business. So when you present, always tell a compelling story, or give people an example of another customer, how they've used your product or service, because people love case studies. Maybe share a quote, and I'm sure some of you have heard this. You go to a presentation, and somebody will start off with this really powerful quote that somebody made. That's what gets their presentation going, and use an analogy. So these are some of the things that you can do. The most important lesson here is use what works for you. So if you've started presentations before, and starting with a question or stating a fact or telling a story has worked for you, keep doing that. But if it hasn't worked for you, just do what works for you. And that is the key thing. I think when somebody's doing a presentation and they feel very, very comfortable, I find the presentation is just more appealing. It's more enjoyable, and that's exactly what you want. You want your audience to come away saying, I've learned something, I've benefited, I want to do business with these people. Those are the things that you want to take place. You know, the one lesson I've learned over the years is if you can make people laugh, people will like you. So often when I meet people that are doing presentations, I will say to them, you know, try and include some humor in your presentation. I find that humor works brilliantly, even if it's self-deprecating humor, because sometimes that works. You know, especially where you're working with an audience where you really want to put yourself on their level. You know, I think if you tell stories that people can relate to, that they can laugh about, you know, they're going to like you more as a presenter. And I think this is really a key thing. The other thing is, I find that when people laugh, let's say you're doing a presentation to a group of 10 people or 20 people, whatever it is, when you're doing your presentation and people laugh, it makes you feel more comfortable. And that's really the thing, is that I find often when I start a presentation, you know, I'm a bit anxious, maybe a bit nervous, but as soon as my audience start laughing, it's almost comforting for me, because then I think they're enjoying themselves. But just be very, very careful. If you're going to make people laugh, you don't want to offend anybody. So just be sensitive to the people in the audience. And these are important things when you're doing a presentation. You want the audience, you want the people on your side, not against you. So one of the questions that were asked early on in the Q&A is, what if you're not using PowerPoints? And I encourage some of you to never use PowerPoints, actually, because PowerPoints can be bad, because every single one of you online have seen people presenting using slides, and they cannot present without these slides. So this is a lesson I want you to learn, is I'm using slides, and I often use slides, but you don't have to use slides. For some of you, just using simple cards, you know, maybe get a piece of paper, write down a couple of points, but I encourage you to write a couple of points down before you start your presentation, because it'll make you focus, it'll keep you on track, and it'll ensure that you discuss what you need to discuss. So really, it doesn't matter what you use. You can use a little piece of paper, use a card, but I encourage you to use something. I mean, I've had that happen to me many times in different parts of the world, especially when I work in remote places, where I get there, no projector, no slides, no computer, just use a whiteboard. And you know what? It doesn't influence the presentation. It's really a tool that you use to keep you on track. That's what I believe slides are for, cards are for, whiteboards are for. The other lesson I've learned is use simple language. You know, I've had the opportunity to present in 22 different countries, but I learned one of my most important lessons is I presented at a small business conference in Amsterdam, and what had happened, it was quite an interesting story actually. What had happened, I was traveling and I got stuck in a storm in Europe. So I was traveling, I was going through Madrid. From Madrid, I was going to Amsterdam. And what happened was, while I was at the airport, I decided to check my presentation and corrupted my presentation. So I had to rewrite my whole presentation, which is what's going to happen sometimes. Anyway, so when I got to the conference, I was rushing. I remember going down to the washroom, getting changed in a tiny little cubicle, putting on a suit, and running up to go and do my presentation. So I was sweaty, I was anxious, I was really not in the best state to present. And I was doing my presentation, and I remember a guy coming up to me afterwards, and he said to me, you know, your presentation was brilliant, but here's a couple of lessons for you. And I thought, okay. He said, there are a couple of things. When you speak to audiences, especially foreign audiences, there are a couple of things. Number one, always speak slowly, which I think is great advice. And number two, always use very, very simple language, because simple language is translatable into any language. And I learned a very important lesson that day from that presenter. The two things. One, Andrew, speak slower, first of all. And secondly, and most importantly, is whenever you do a presentation, don't use big words. Use language that everybody can understand. Because then you get your whole audience listening to you. And just be aware of this. When you do presentations, no fancy language, no jargon, just make it simple, easy to understand. Use personal stories. People love it when you tell your stories. So tell stories on a regular basis and use case studies. Examples that people can relate to. Really, that's what you want to do. You want to use examples that people can relate to. And even when you're doing a sales presentation, just think of it. You know, you might say to somebody, you know, we've got a customer just like that, and this is the way she used this, or that's what she did. Again, we love hearing examples of other people that are doing the same thing. So think about that. I encourage you to use pictures to tell the story. And it's a very important lesson that I've learned. And this picture that you're looking at on the screen now is a picture of me when I worked in Nizhny Novgorod in Russia. And it was a really, really interesting trip. Actually, it was on that trip, that's when I realized I could work anywhere in the world. And I want you to understand this. I say this to business owners on a regular basis. Is often the thing that holds us back is ourselves, maybe our confidence or whatever it is. But this trip was really, really important because then I realized, you know what, Andrew, you can work anywhere in the world. But I really enjoyed Russia. It was actually the first time I'd ever seen snow in my life. And let me tell you something. Snow is a beautiful thing, and I'm sure some of you understand, but those of you that don't see it regularly, snow is an absolutely beautiful thing. But in Russia, they really enjoy the cold weather. Anyway, so the one day we were walking, this was probably the second or third day, and this guy on the left-hand side, which is not me, the guy on the left-hand side there, his name was Peter. He was a Dutch guy that I was working with. And first of all, he gave me that jacket. That jacket that I've got on is a Russian military jacket. That thing you can sleep in the middle of minus 40 degrees, you can sleep. That's how hot that thing is. Anyway, so I was wearing that jacket. And the one day we went for a walk, he wanted to show me around the area. And here was this guy, this Russian guy. And every day, what he used to do, he used to ski and then stop, he used to make a hole in this lake and go for a swim, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. And I remember chatting to him and saying, how do you get in there? He says, you do it slowly. And eventually, your body, acclimatizes to the cold and you can swim. So this was his daily routine. His daily routine was to ski around the area, then take off all his clothes, leave his bathing suit on, and jump into the water. And I thought this was fascinating. But the most important thing that happened to me on this trip, and it's a very important lesson for every single one of you business owners, is that if you can sell your product or service locally, you can sell it anywhere in the world. The difference between people that do it and people that don't do it is often a lack of confidence. You've got to believe in your product or service. If you believe in your product or service and you do it really well, you can sell it anywhere in the world. So understand that. The other lesson I've learned, and it's a very important lesson, is when you do presentations, the more you practice, the better you become. Whether it's sales presentations, whether it's pitching to investors, whether it's seminars that you're presenting to share your expertise and your knowledge, it's really about practicing. Actually, I find that when I don't regularly do a presentation, I lose a little bit of confidence. So understand the importance of practicing. The second thing that I have found is that when you're doing a presentation, if you dress for the part, you feel more confident. And whatever that thing is it your jacket that you wear? Is it the shoes that you wear? Is it the makeup you put on? Whatever it is, the most important thing for you as a presenter is that you feel comfortable. You don't want to overdress, but basically the rule is you dress just as well as the people attending or maybe a little bit better. So for example, last year I worked in Jordan, and because it was the Middle East, people are more formal. They wear suits and ties. So when I did my presentation, I wore a suit and tie. When I work in North America, I hardly ever wear a tie. So dress for the occasion. You don't want to overdress, but you want to make sure that you feel professional. Also, a very important thing, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you. You go to a presentation, or you go to a sales presentation, or whatever it is you're doing, and there's a presenter, and they're focusing on one side of the room. And that is very, very distracting. So one of the things you want to do, which is a really good idea, is to scan the room slowly from left to right to make sure that you have all the people attention. So you're focusing on everybody. So scan the room. And the other thing is, I encourage you to be animated, to move around, to use your hands, to point at things. That's what I encourage you to do. Because the more animated you are, the better it is. One of the most powerful things you have when you do a presentation is your voice. When you're doing presentations, you can raise your voice to get people's attention, or you can lower your voice. Because when you lower your voice, it almost forces people to listen. So use your voice. There's nothing worse than going to a presentation and this person has this monotone voice. And I've been to conferences and trade shows and seminars and people have a monotone voice. It is quite painful. The other great idea is every now and then when you're presenting, make an important statement and then just pause. Pausing is a wonderful way to get people's attention. So I encourage you to use this when you're doing a presentation. It's really, really a powerful thing. Always expect the unexpected. Actually, earlier on I was speaking about technology not working, and some of you were saying that happens and things like that. What I did, because I was concerned that technology wasn't going to work, I had set up a new computer next door so I could have gone from this room that I'm working in, moved to the next room and done my presentation there. I always say to you, things are going to break down. And I promise you it's when you least expect it. And I don't care how experienced you are, when things break down, it's going to make you anxious. It's going to make you sweaty. It's going to make you nervous. And it may mess up the start of your presentation. So here's the rule. Always have a just in case plan. Just in case the computer doesn't work. Just in case the projector doesn't work. Just in case something happens. Because I promise you, I've done some of the most ridiculous things. Actually, let me tell you a story. I was working in a city probably about 3 hours away from here. Anyway, so I take my car, and my car is, if you lock your trunk and leave the key in there, you're basically screwed. So anyway, so I go to my car. I've got my computer in my car and my projector in my car. So I come out of the hotel, I get to my car, open my trunk, and now I've got to put on my jacket. I don't know why, but I've put my key of my car in the trunk. Close the trunk, and then as I close it, I realize, oh my gosh, I do not have my jacket, I do not have my wallet, I had my phone, I do not have money, I have nothing. I've got a presentation in 15 minutes time, and I have no computer, no projector, no money. Anyway, so I go to the hotel, I'm in the reception area, I say to the guy, can somebody give me a ride to this conference center? Because I'm the presenter, and when I get there, everybody's going to be there, and I'm not going to be there. The guy said, sure. And I said, you know what, I'll pay you when I get my car open, because now my car is locked with my key in the trunk. Anyway, so I go there, and I get there, and luckily, I keep all my presentations on Dropbox. Just ask somebody to borrow a computer, borrow a projector, and I was up and running. I couldn't get my key out, actually. I had to get one of my staff to drive 3.5 hours to come and bring me the spare key. But always be prepared for those things to happen. And I think that is a very important lesson, because otherwise you're going to get flustered. You're going to you're going to get sweaty, and you're really going to panic. Let's go back a little bit to structure, because every now and then people say to me, how should I structure my presentation? And here's a little template that you can use. But basically, most of us would have learned this at school. You know, when you wrote an essay, your teacher or your professor would say to you, you know, start with an opening, write the body, and have a great closing. And I think this little structure is actually very, very good. This is one of the ones that I use. Even when I run my webinars, our webinars are typically 60 minutes. We have an introduction, we have the body, we have a closing to summarize, and then we leave some time for minutes. But come up with a template for you. And it's really key that you learn. Nobody will ever complain if you finish early. But if you finish late, people may complain. Now, some of you, when you do a presentation, you get nervous. Let me just say something to you. I've been doing presentations for 21 years. Online, offline, in great venues, in terrible venues. I always get nervous. Actually, when I don't get nervous, I worry. But the lesson I've learned is a very simple one. As long as you are prepared, as long as you know your stuff, the audience wants you to succeed. So it's normal to start off a little bit nervous. Everybody starts like that. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing your stuff, you're going to start like that. But it's really controlling those nerves. And nobody in the audience wants you to fail. And that's the lesson I want you to learn, is nobody in the audience wants you to fail. So come up with techniques that work for you. So in my case, I try and tell a joke so that I can relax. And whatever works for you, do that. But understand that even after doing this for years, we get nervous. When you're doing a presentation, again, these little things that you do that are really important is make sure that you greet everybody first of all. And I promise you, I was running a course last week, which was really, really interesting, because I arrived there and the technology always works. Anyway, so I start this presentation and the projector decides it's not going to work. But because I always planned for just in cases, I had another projector in my car, went to my car, got the projector, put it up. Then I realized I needed something else, ran back. So this was really quite stressful. First of all, I was running to the car back. And then I started this group, and there was one young woman sitting at the back of the class, and I could see she was not in a mood to be in my presentation. She was not in a mood to be in my presentation. And by her body language, I could see it. But I thought, you know what? If I can win her over, I'm going to win everybody over. And that is a very good idea, is watch people. Look at their reactions. Look at their body language. And based on that, you will see how well or badly your presentation is going. But do not focus on it too much. Because if somebody's having a really bad day, doesn't matter what you do. You can do somersaults, you can do magic, you will still not get them on their side. Anyway, but basic, real simple rules that work is greet the group first of all. Begin on time. Always begin on time. Watch your time. I have a very important thing that I use, and maybe you can copy it. I don't know where I learned it, probably read it in a book, is I remove my watch, I put it on the table, and I show the audience that I'm watching my time, which is really, really key. Stick to your topic, speak slowly and clearly, and interact with the audience. But just be very, very careful, because you may have some introverted people in your audience. You don't want to pick on somebody in the audience. So just be very careful of that. Some people like interacting, others don't like interacting. So I'm one of those people that don't like interacting. So if you're doing a presentation, don't ask me to do things because I don't want to do that. So just be very, very careful of that. So ask people if they want to interact. Whenever you're presenting, always speak to the group, not to your visuals. The visuals are a tool. Your slides, your board, your whatever it is, these are a tool. Some of you can use color to highlight points, and just be very, very careful that you don't block people's view, which can happen. You know, you stand to a side and then somebody can't see the slides or can't see the presentation or whatever. Sometimes you have no option. I've worked in some awful rooms, tiny little rooms where you have to walk in front of the projector. Now that's a no-no. If anybody who's done regular presentations, you should never walk in front of your projector if you're using a projector. But sometimes you have no option because the room is so tiny. So avoid blocking the group's view. And if you have to use graphs, make sure they're easy to see. And if you're going to use figures, easy to understand. I can't tell you how many times I've been to an academic conference. They'll put on a slides that I do not understand, and I'm thinking, what the hell? Very important. Very, very important. Don't read your presentation. People can hear when you read your presentation. You know what you're going to mess up sometimes? Even I run webinars regularly. When I start my webinars, I mess up a couple of times. Why? Because I'm human. I should be messing up. Perfectionism is dangerous. So do not read your presentation. Be very, very careful of pacing up and down. Just be very careful. Sometimes it shows your nerves. So just be very careful. Sometimes I walk around too much. Be careful of fidgeting. You put keys in your pocket or money in your pocket and you play with it all the time. Be careful of that. The other thing is umming and ahhing. And this is my theory. If somebody ums and ahs regularly, it's because they didn't prepare. So just be very, very careful of that. If you're well prepared, you know your topic, you've got a couple of pointers to work with, you're probably not going to and ah. And again, this comes with experience. You can improve that. What about questions? You know, not every single, but every now and then, I will have some presenters and they'll say to me, you know, I'm going to present a seminar. What if somebody asks a question and I do not know the answer? I always say, you're not supposed to know all the answers. If you don't know the answer, be honest with people. Be honest with people and say, I do not know the answer. I'll get back to you. Some of my presenters feel comfortable answering questions as they go along, which I do. But others prefer to answer questions at the end. I find when I do webinars, it's actually easier to answer questions at the end. But do what makes you comfortable. A great opportunity for every single one of you, and I encourage you to do this, is join an organization like Toastmasters. Some of the most successful business owners that I've worked with over the years have joined Toastmasters, and I've encouraged them to do it. So go online this afternoon, find a club in your area, and join. I think it is one of the greatest lessons from today's presentation. I know I did a little bit of a Toastmasters course. I didn't complete it, but it was one of those things that I think changed my life, because I realized when I went to Toastmasters that you can learn to become a better presenter. And I'll never forget, I must tell you the story. The one time when I first did my first presentation, I was as nervous as hell. You know, people tell you to practice in the shower, to practice in front of a mirror. I did all those things, and none of those things worked. And just before I was going to start presenting, the guy just before me started his presentation, opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Not a single word. You can imagine how nervous that made me. But I realized, you know what? Once I started speaking, the words started coming out. I thought, you know what? This is a learned skill. You can learn the stuff. It's not, you often look at presenters, you think, geez, that person was born to present. I don't believe anybody's born to present. I believe we learn this. Let me speak a little bit about sales presentations. Another big opportunity. I believe that if you do a great sales presentation, and I'm talking about in-person presentations, if you do a great sales presentation, the customer will probably buy your product or service. When you do sales presentations, a couple of very important rules is, first of all, before you do the presentation, ask the client as many questions as possible so you understand exactly what they need. So that's really the key thing. When you present, make sure it's short and simple. You don't have to use slides, you don't have to, but for some of you, that may help. That may help. You may take your computer with you, go through a couple of slides, which answers most of the questions, and most importantly, presents a solution. This is your problem. This is the solution. The other thing I recommend you do is, if you're going to do sales presentations regularly, is share case studies. People like knowing that other people have bought this product or service, and they've used it, and this has been the benefit. They love hearing those things. Be willing to be sidetracked. You're going to be doing a sales presentation, you've got your whole thing prepared, and then somebody will ask you a random question. That's okay, but as long as you come back to the most important part, which is how you're going to solve their problem. And this is a very important thing, and I'm going to repeat it later again. When you're doing a presentation, it's a conversation. It's a conversation, except that maybe you're standing up in front of a group, which is a good idea to stand up because your voice is clearer when you stand up. So you're standing in front of a group and you're having this conversation. That's the way you want to think about it. Because as soon as people say presentation, some of us just panic. So just be very, very careful of that. So that's what you do when you're doing a sales presentation. When you're pitching your idea, which some of us will do, let's say we're trying to raise money, we're trying to raise $50,000 or $100,000 for our business, this is what you do. When you present to investors, this is what they want to know. What problem are you solving? What is your value proposition? What differentiates you? What's unique? What's special about you? What is your business model? How are you going to make money? What is your marketing plan? Who are your competitors? So this is a great template. If any of you are asked to pitch your idea to a group of investors, this is a great template that you can use. It's very, very simple, but it's effective. Who's the management team? What are your financial projections? And what are your accomplishments to date? So remember that presentation skills are not just standing in front of a group presenting so that they can learn from you, which is a great marketing opportunity in my opinion. But it's also about selling to one person or two people or three people. It's also about pitching. It's about getting your point across and making sure that people understand exactly what you're doing. So think of those as presentations too. And there's some great tips in this presentation that you can use. So let me just summarize quickly. Remember, a presentation is a conversation, but sometimes with more than one person. But if you think of it as a conversation, you're going to relax and you're going to be a better presenter. Secondly, make sure your presentations are interesting. They need to be dynamic, they need to be interesting, they need to be colorful, they need to be relevant. That's really key. Tell stories. People love telling stories. People love hearing stories. So always tell a story. Short and sweet and to the point. Don't keep going on, but tell people stories. Use examples, use case studies that people can relate to. Not too much theory. You want case studies, examples that people can relate to. Look at your audience. So scan the audience. Look at people in the face. Look at them in the eye. Interact with people. Interact, be friendly, use gestures, emphasize things. Use your voice sometimes, lower it sometimes, but use your voice. Always finish on time. This is a rule that I've stuck to for years, and I promise you it is one of the most important rules, especially when you're working with adults. Finish on time. And remember that practice makes perfect. I believe that if you take this information that I've shared with you today, and whenever you get the opportunity to present, you make sure that you're prepared, that you use some of these tips, I promise you, you're going to become a much better presenter. That's the first thing that's going to happen. But secondly, and most importantly, you are going to generate more revenue, and that ultimately is the objective here. I want you to build a very successful business, and that is my wish for every single one of you online.